So, welcome back to the Omnia Mea Compass. Today we're kicking off a new mini-series for a very specific group of people, expats in Switzerland, who feel the pull towards starting their own business. And over the next 8 episodes, we'll talk about money, legal basics, identity, visibility, and the very real constraints and freedoms that come with building something of your own in this country. And I'm Susan Platt, the founder of Omnia Mea. I won't be doing this alone. For this season, I will be in conversation with Libby O'Loughlin, an Australian expat who is now also a Swiss, an author known as the Content Coach, co-founder of a climate tech startup, and longtime Switzerland resident who moved here around 20 years ago and has built her own rather unique business journey in this landscape. And she is also my very good friend. I met Libby in 2012 when she was one of the co-founders of the Powerhouse Network, a women's network in Zurich, and one of the earlier women's network in Switzerland, which was active for a decade. Libby, I am so very happy you're here for this. And before we start dissecting Swiss realities, can you share how you introduce yourself these days and what your experience has been like moving, living, and working here?
Well, thank you for having me with you, Susan. It's a real honor. And as you said, we've been in each other's orbits now for, I guess, over a decade. Well over 10 years anyway. I still remember our very first meeting when you made me laugh so hard that I almost cried. It was just hilarious. And I guess most people listening will know that one of the things that kind of softens the expat experience in terms of the challenges and so forth is in fact meeting kick-butt people who make you laugh till you're sobbing. And I also love that you asked, how do you introduce yourself these days? Because I think this is one of the key aspects of expat life, and that is the art of pivoting.
Indeed.
And we've talked about this at length. I have a very, very unlinear career, very pivoty. I've lived and worked in Australia, the US and Switzerland, much of it in narrative media of some sort, just about any capacity you care to imagine. So that's like writing, editing, publishing, production, TV news and current affairs, community radio, podcasting, fiction, non-fiction, books, print and digital, editorial advisory, and teaching screenwriting and what I like to call story mechanics. And so, yeah, when you hear it like that, it does sound like a bit of a hot mess. But at a certain point, I realized that over the decades, the many obstacles I've faced moving countries and having kids and all the things that life deals up, the changing media landscape as well, they've all helped me really hone the art of adapting and pivoting in a way that is very much aligned with my values, my strengths and interests. And now I very much enjoy helping other people with that process. I like to call it the adventure.
Yes, and I'm grateful that I am one of those people.
So in business, I registered my production house, Rowan Girl Production, as an Einzelfirma, sole proprietorship in about 2010, I think it was. And since then, I've also been on boards and co-founded a couple of Swiss Vereins, non-profits, which you know about and are a part of. And more recently, I co-founded a climate tech startup, which is actually an AG, an AG. And I know we'll be diving into the ins and outs of these kinds of business entities next week.
We will.
We will. But enough about me. We're doing this Swiss Biz Builder Series because you have so much knowledge in your noggin from all your experience that you'd like to share. And I'm very happy to be here to pick your brain, to tease out some of that gold over the coming weeks. So should we dig in?
Let's dig in.
And this week we're interested in exploring 3 main areas for people who are thinking about or wanting to start a business. Why Switzerland is attractive for that. And the second one is the common challenges that are faced here. And the third one, which I'm very interested to hear your take on this, is the mindset.
Yes.
So let's start with the first area, why Switzerland is attractive. And if you had to say what was the number one reason that expats choose Switzerland for business, what would you say?
Well, for one, stability. Switzerland is like the Rolls-Royce of economics. It's smooth, reliable, and expensive. But the reliability is gold for entrepreneurs. And Switzerland is an excellent choice to start a business for anyone, including expats. And now is a great time to start a business in Switzerland. It has been experiencing a proper formation boom over the last couple of years, with 2024 having a record almost 53,000 companies registered. And that's a 2.6% increase from the year before that had already surpassed the record of the previous years. I think because it is such a great place to start a business. It has a strong economy. It has an international hub, finance, pharma, tech. It has a great quality of life and infrastructure. People are coming more and more to Switzerland. And quite often, and this is how we've met in the Powerhouse, for expats, especially for women, they are trailing spouses or partners. Their partners are starting a new job in Switzerland. And then they arrive here, and sometimes their education is no longer recognized here. And they have to, as you mentioned, they have to pivot and they have to reinvent themselves, and they have a drive to do something new. And it can feel slightly overwhelming. But as we see from, the statistics, people are doing it. They're embracing the challenge and they're taking the plunge. And you can do it too.
Yeah. That's a good motivation and inspiring too, isn't it?
Yeah.
There is a lot of energy, a lot of skills out there. Yeah, and a lot of goodwill to do something.
Yes, and the right kind of network too. I mean, you will find if you take the challenge as you and I have both done, especially today, there are so many networks out there, and you can meet like-minded people, and especially if you're a solopreneur and you're starting out on your own, it's important to connect and find the right people.
My word. So which sectors are actually particularly strong at the moment?
Well, and I find this very interesting, not as perhaps you might expect. Anything tech-related or AI-related was leading the field in 2024, but it was craftsmanship. Craftsmanship was the number one sector of companies, new companies being formed, and then followed closely by consulting, real estate, and then retail trade.
So another question for you. Why do you think Switzerland is a great place to start business as an expat specifically?
Well, we touched on this very briefly before, but there are a variety of angles that you can look at it. But it has a supportive ecosystem. It's consistently ranked as a global innovation leader. Founders benefit from a stable economic and political system, like a highly competitive tax environment and tax system, which is always very attractive, and a skilled workforce and access to research institutions like the ETH in Zurich and various government and private support programs. And I have to say, I have been doing this and helping entrepreneurs starting their own business for quite a long time. I started out with the Swiss Small Biz Bootcamp in 2017. And since then, the process of incorporating a company in Switzerland has become significantly easier due to the digitization and the emergence of specialized online service providers, while government websites and many private platforms offer robust English language support. So I think one of the initial hurdles, and we'll get to that later on in the series too, is the language barrier, and where you used to always have to file everything in one of the official 4 Swiss languages. You are today able to do a lot of this stuff in English, and there's a lot of support out there in English, and you can do a lot of it online. You don't have to necessarily, with the exception of very few things, still go to a notary to get everything done. So the setup is there.
Yeah. So it's not without its challenges. And I mean, you mentioned language barriers and other things. What do you think is the biggest shock in your experience talking with tons of expats? Because I know you have a wide network, and in fact, you've lived overseas yourself. Married to an American?
Yes.
So what would you say is the biggest shock for expats starting out?
Well, I'm not sure if it's a shock, but I do hear quite a bit that the bureaucracy can be challenging, and it is what puts some people off because they're just too afraid of all these bureaucratic hurdles. And it, bureaucracy is like a Swiss watch. It's precise, but you need a manual. So, you can educate yourself though and figure out what you need to do. And every canton has its own quirks. But as I said, it has gotten a lot easier and there's a lot of guidance available online these days. So it's easier to handle the onset of digital tools. And I also have a downloadable tool of the Swiss startup landscape, sort of a mind map of all the things you have to think about, all the different areas. And I'll link to that in the show notes.
Other challenges if you want to start as an expat in a foreign country?
Yeah, and I think that's what I said earlier. Language can be a hurdle. I mean, it's daunting to think about starting your own business to begin with, and quite often it's a mindset thing. We'll get to that in a little bit as well. But I think in addition to getting over those limiting beliefs and really giving yourself a push and a kick to start something of your own, quite often if you move to a new country, it's the language, and B, it can also be the culture that you're not familiar with, depending on where you move. And then also quite often you need to have a new support network. If you move away from where you used to be, you lose your close families and friends, and you have to sort of rebuild that in a new environment. And so those are a little bit of the extra challenges on a basic level. And then, of course, on top of that, you have some legal challenges. You have to make sure that you have the proper residence and work permit in place if you want to start something on your own. But if you're EU or EFTA citizen, generally you can just apply for a B residence permit and prove self-employment with a business plan if you want to start something on your own. And if you're a non-EU or EFTA or so-called third country citizen, you have a bit stricter criteria. But again, it depends on whether you are married to a Swiss and how long you've been living here and your living circumstances. So that's another bit of a hurdle, or the legal challenges. And if you want to establish a limited liability company or a joint stock company, then at least one person must hold, one person with signing authority must be a resident of Switzerland and hold a valid Swiss residence or work permit. And so this means founders who eventually move back abroad must appoint a local director or board member, which adds complexity and cost, and, can be a little bit of an extra hurdle. And then speaking about extra costs and finance, money is always such a big issue, and it's such a big topic. And again, finances and budgeting and planning, we'll talk about that later on as well. So the operating costs in Switzerland are higher than in other areas. Switzerland is expensive, and so expats must budget for significantly higher costs for rent and salaries and administrative services like accounting and legal fees compared to most other countries. So before you start out, important to get ideas of the challenges you face on that front. And then in addition, and we'll get to that in the next episode where we talk about the different legal structures in Switzerland. For some of them, you require a minimum capital, like the GmbH. You have to have at least 20,000. For the AG, you should have 100,000, of which you must at least have 50,000 paid in. And then finally, on the financial topic, you also have a complex tax system here. So it's important, unless that's your thing and you're a big number nerd, to get some support with a proper accountant or tax advisor. So you have all of your boxes ticked on that front. And then finally, we talked about that, the language barrier and the diversity. We have 4 official languages, but a lot of it is in English now. And there are also a lot of women's networks or business networks here in Switzerland. And Switzerland has become the hub of a lot of the very big tech companies like Google. And so there are many networks available to sort of go out and meet like-minded people who would like to start their own company and face the same challenges. And finally, if you're thinking about hiring staff and employees, the Swiss labor laws are detailed. And again, that's something where you should definitely get some legal advice if you plan on starting a company from the get-go with more than one person.
And you also, I remember, once talked about that kind of formal business culture?
Yes, although I find that has softened a bit and depends on what area you are in. But yes, the Swiss can be notorious for being very formal in the beginning, and you have in the German language also, and in the French and Italian, the different forms of courtesy where you're on a first name basis is not necessarily something that is done. But I find over the last years, especially with the onset of English becoming more and more of a business language in Switzerland, that it has softened and you address each other on a first name basis when you get to meet each other. But it can still be a hurdle depending on what sector you are in, especially perhaps in a bit more of the conservative areas like accounting and legal.
Interesting. Mindset. I'm always very curious that you bring this in as an important aspect of this. So what mindset do you think is essential for expats starting a business in Switzerland?
I think I'm a big fan of Marie Forleo, and I love her book, Everything is Figure Outable. And in my life, and I have also had a very non-linear career. And I like the concept of everything is figure outable. And sometimes for some people, the hurdles are higher than for other people. But, if you are dedicated and if you want to do something, then you can figure it out. I'd say if you are in Switzerland, you have to be a mix of a curious learner and quietly courageous trailblazer. I do remember when we had a speaker, I think it was Tabby Haller-Jordan at the Powerhouse one time, and I had a bit of an aha moment where, the topic was about women applying for a role versus men applying for a role. And I think the numbers were something like men apply for a role if they meet about 50 or 60% of the requirements, and women like 80 to 90 or something like that. So we always think that we already have to be the right fit before we actually go into it, because we're discouraged from an early age to be brave and make mistake, right? I mean, there's another good book, Be Brave, Not Perfect, that shows how girls from a young age just sort of lack that support, that it's okay to fall down and get back up and make mistakes. So I think it's very important that you figure it out yourself. And in that moment at the Powerhouse, I remember somebody from the audience also said, if you want to have an opportunity, don't think that it's already there. You have to go out and create it, right? If you want the silver lining, that sucker's not just going to appear. So you're going to have to sort of rip it out of the sky. And I think that's very important. If you want it, you have to go out and get it. There's no knight in shining armor that's going to come and hand it to you. So you have to, learn how to brush the horse and saddle it up and get on it and keep going. So, but on that note, Switzerland does reward consistency and trust, and it's not about quick wins. It's about playing the long game. And I think small, consistent steps, and this is something that I always say, is you have to start somewhere. You don't have to have it all figured out. But if you really want to do it, and if you want to build your own business, you have to at one point really decide that you want to do it. What do you want? Figure it out. And so, be open and be aware that you have to learn a new landscape, a new language, and new norms and new laws and unwritten rules. And if you see yourself as a student and not a victim, and sort of see it as a challenge where you can, level up as you go along and adapt sort of the growth mindset that, no matter what your situation is and how old you are, what your previous qualifications are, if you want to have a fresh start in Switzerland, you definitely can. And I always say, find the motivation. That's key. Like, what's your why? Why do you want to do it? Do some internal work. There's, again, a lot of great tools. And then if you have clarity on what you want and where you want to go, that gives you direction and confidence and momentum and gets you on your way.
Yeah. I must say, when I came to Switzerland, I had that feeling when I didn't speak the language. I had to, at a certain point, kind of say, can I take this as an opportunity to be humble and just talk about the bread and the weather for a while till I learn a few more words, even though I really wanted to be discussing philosophy or the intricacies of the English language or so on and so forth. But it was such a wonderful exercise, I think, in just being present with what's happening now and looking at the opportunities that you have and somehow finding those things that are emerging in the why area. Why am I Why am I
Yes.
doing this again? Okay, I have to put in a bit of work here to learn how to speak, for example, not like a toddler. But it really does help clarify the why, I think, as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that overwhelm is often a sign of mental overload, and it's not a personal inadequacy, right? I mean, when it hits, I'd invite people to remember that you don't have to have the whole path figured out. You don't have to be
Yes.
able to discuss everything philosophy in this new language. But like you said, start small and pick the topics that you can manage, and then the small wins, they really build up over time. So suddenly you realize, oh, I can order the bread, and maybe now I can level up to the sort of the next
Start a
topic.
GmbH.
Start a GmbH, right? That goes from ordering bread to start a GmbH. I do want to say that the mindset is key, and it is your greatest asset. If you don't know what you want, or if you're not working on yourself, you're not gonna get very far. I think a lot of the entrepreneurs stop at some point because they lack the confidence to continue, and the mindset that they can actually figure it out and that it's okay to make mistakes, and they're actually part of the process.
And so if someone has that kind of overwhelm, what would you remind them of?
Well, one of the things that I find extremely important is to take a break and take yourself out of the equation and step away from screens and take walks, go out in the fresh air. Movement is very important for a healthy mind. And I have the privilege of having the Loftus here right near the woods. And my lunch breaks always is I take my dogs out for a walk, and just stepping away from the screen. I'm a very brain heavy person, so I do spend a lot of time in deep thought, and I hunker down and have these bouts of work. Then it is really good to form healthy habits and really make sure that you do get breaks where you can recharge and step away and get a fresh perspective. And sometimes when you do that, you realize that the problem that you were facing, you were making it a lot bigger than it actually is. If you have a blockage at the moment, you can always step away. And you're allowed to go slower and still succeed. You don't have to have this super speed. Just remember, building a business is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You do one thing, one aligned step beats 10 frantic. So, one thing at a time and one day at a time, and small things add up. And, this is the motto of my company, of Omnia Mea, and Omnia Mea Me Comporto means basically all that you need, you carry with you. You were given this, and you can nurture it and you can build on it, but you have what it takes to start a business.
And I've heard you say before that really beautiful piece of advice that nothing is wrong with me.
Yeah, nope.
I'm just trying to hold too many decisions in my head at once. And I love that. And I must say that is one of your rather kick butt skills, is, being able to really pull things down into the next step and make it doable in those kind of smart goals way. That's one of your superpowers, I think.
Yeah, many people some of these complex issues that we face, they're just the sum of small parts. And if you learn to break it down and then sort of either sequence it or just focus on the things that actually matter in that point in time, then you feel less overwhelmed. And then you also, if you make healthy habits of actually tracking those things, that's very important, because we tend to always just focus on the sort of the failures and the negative rather than the successes. And I keep a gratitude journal, and I look back, and even small things sometimes they add up. On a very hard day or where things don't go, you will always find something that went right that way. And I find if you close the day out on a gratitude, on a good note, that sort of puts the nasty bits in the corner.
Yeah. Yeah. So just quickly back to networking, because you have said before that networking and trust building are important in Swiss business culture. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's not just in Swiss business culture, but I found that I am an introvert, and I absolutely hated networking with a vengeance. I can say that from my business career, going up the ladder and going to these corporate events, it was the one standing in a corner talking to the few people that I know and just looking. Or the pop lad and ready to go whenever it was. And I have to say, as you know, I got into the Powerhouse. It was a rather serendipitous chain of events. And I remember suddenly being in a room full of people that I really liked and I could connect with and that were my wavelengths and I could just sort of have a conversation with. And it wasn't about shoving a business card in somebody else's face. It was about skill sharing and about being there for each other and learning from each other. For me, that was real revelation. And I think we are living in a time where it becomes more and more important that these kind of networks where it's not about the money, where it really is about cooperation, it is really important. And there are many out there now. And so trust for me is the real currency and collaboration. And people here place a high value on reliability and discretion and follow through. So that's something to keep in mind. So, they notice if you're on time and if you keep your word, which I think is universal, not just the Swiss, but the time thing, Swiss watches and trains and all that kind of stuff. But I do say sort of these deep ethical values, I think they're still very prevalent. If you keep your word, like I said, if your actions match your values. And that's also very aligned with my Omnia Mea Compass idea of leading with integrity and kindness rather than with noise and ego. And I also would say that many people here value depth over breadth. So, have a few solid relationships. It's good to go out and, and have a network. But, to really build something, it's good to have a good small inner circle too, where you can bounce ideas off or get some feedback, especially if it's an area where you maybe don't have that much experience yet. So it's better to have sort of few circle of trusted advisor and then a large shallow network. And then finally, I would say reputation compounds. In a relatively small interconnected market, how you treat people travels. So values-driven behavior, clear communication, and get a content coach if you're, uncertain on how that works. And fairness are long-term business strategies and not nice extras. So those are sort of my pillars on how I have built my network and always I found that it has really worked out quite well for me. And so, the takeaway is how you, show up consistently. And especially if you are starting something new, also listen. Don't just pitch. If you're exchanging sort of ideas and honor your commitments and then let your values be visible in how you work. And over time, that quiet reliability becomes your strongest business card.
I like that. So, Susan,
Libby,
episode 1 in the can.
Woo-hoo.
Thanks for having me
Thank you.
board for this first in the Swiss Biz Builder Series, Susan. What are we going to talk about next time?
So next time we'll break down how the Swiss business structures, the 3 main ones. There's a couple of other ones, but we focus on the ones that are most prevalent, which is the sole proprietorship or the Einzelfirma, the GmbH, and the AG. And we discuss what purposes they serve and how you can identify which structure will be a good fit for your business. And so, before we wrap up, thank you very much, Libby, for being here and for being part of the Swiss Biz Builder Series. Remember the Omnia Mea mantra that all that you need, you already carry within you. Starting business isn't easy, but you got what it takes. And so let's do it.
Let's do it.